Hello and welcome to the Friday show. It is a very special episode because I've got one of the best press critics, journalism professors, probably one of the most respected in the country from NYU and PressThink.com. It's Jay Rosen joining me. He joined me several times on the old show over at SiriusXM, but I hadn't invited him on the podcast yet. I don't know why. Maybe I thought he wouldn't come on, but I went for it. I'm going for it. I'm just getting started, everybody. I am really excited about all the new stuff that I'm doing here, and I hope that you'll go subscribe to my TikTok. If you're on TikTok, if you're not, by the way, if you're not on any social media and you don't use social media, good for you. I don't blame you. But if you do, I just signed up for TikTok, Pete.Dominic. I'm posting videos there. Of course, got the YouTubes going, youtube.com/standupwithpete. I've really figured out how I can put out a lot more each and every day, and I'm doing just that. So thank you for all of your support and for signing up for a subscription. If you haven't, you can right now, patreon.com/PeteDominic. I also said yesterday's show that if you don't want to do Patreon, that's fine. You could send me a check or Venmo. I've got a new way to keep track of that and figure that out too. I don't want you to cancel your Patreon subscription necessarily, but if you're a person who hasn't signed up because of that, then hey, email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. All right, so Jay Rosen, so good. Our conversation really interesting because we talked a lot about CNN and Chris Licht and the CNN town hall. We talked about how to cover Trump, and it's been obvious for a really long time. We talked about political journalism in general, the horse race. We talked about his ideas of citizen agenda model. We covered a whole bunch of ground. I think you're going to really love this conversation. This is what I've got for you on the Friday, but I might be dropping some more, maybe a can you talk real quick, and probably a conversation with Christian and Ophira tomorrow. So look for all of that. Let's do it right now with Jay Rosen. Go to pressthinc.org. Follow him on Twitter at jrosen_NYU. Here we go. Oh, there he is. Very, very excited to have him joining me because I'm getting the big scoop. I've just seen it come across the wires. Jay Rosen, your name is out there to take over at CNN. What will you? What do you think? What are you going to change? Good to see you, man.
I don't think I'm quite ready for that, but I could take over as their public editor or something like that, which they don't have.
Yeah, they don't. Interesting that they don't have that. I wanted to start there just talking about kind of cable news overall and your views on what it is and what maybe it could be, because I know you've got a lot of thoughts about that. Where would you start?
Well, it depends on what we're asking.
Political journalism.
Yeah, it depends on what we're asking of cable news. If what we want is a profit maximizer, then we already know what works on cable news.
Right.
You know, that's not a mystery. It's outrage. It's partisanship. It's anger 24 hours a day. And the same things that stir people up online. So there's no mystery about that. What gets interesting is when you try to provide something that's different than that. And I mean, CNN, to take the latest focus of this conversation, has been making about $1 billion a year, more or less, and is now scheduled to make this year, with some changes, about $750 million. So it's not like it's breaking down as a business. It's not, but the direction of that business is very much in doubt. And in many journalism situations that I find myself trying to study these days, this problem of trying to be both sides or trying to be in the middle, or there's many different names for it. You know, objectivity is a name for it. And the New York Times is now trying to substitute for that the term independent, by which they mean independent of the parties, I think, is constantly kind of in the way of where I think journalism needs to go. And the reason for that is, and this is something I've written about a lot, many routines in political journalism were built on an image of American politics in which we have two major parties that operate in a similar way. They have different philosophies, different ideologies, but political life is a contest between these two things that are more or less the same in how they work. And that image of political life gave rise to a lot of routines in journalism. And now that that image doesn't describe the world anymore, the routines are still there. And this is a problem that I come back to again and again in my media criticism.
You certainly do. And I love that because so much has changed, but journalism, media hasn't changed as much along with it. Specifically, I think you talk about when Donald Trump became president, the Beltway press, the Capitol Hill media, they tried to cover him like they cover every president. But that, of course, was impossible. And by the way, if you ask Steve Bannon, my old friend Steve Bannon, who I shared a studio with at Sirius XM and had to hang garlic and crucifixes in it just to try to prevent him from coming. But he always came. He always came, Jay. The point is, flood the shit. Flood the zone with shit. That's what they basically did.
Yes. And one of the lessons of the last couple of weeks in this turmoil at CNN is that when CNN was flooded with shit by the MAGA movement and Trump as a candidate and president, that creates a very hard problem in a serious newsroom. And Chris Licht and David Zaslav and the ownership at CNN interpreted that problem as our journalists just became partisans and grabbed a jersey and went out on the field and started fighting for their favorites.
Right.
That's their interpretation of what happened. My interpretation of what happened is when one of the two major parties decides to flood the zone with shit, as Bannon put it in 2018, that creates a kind of very difficult problem for journalists who are trying to be independent and in no one's pocket.
Right.
But Zaslav had no sympathy for that. Chris Licht didn't seem to understand it. But I want to also point out something else before we go on to another subject, which is one of the most remarkable things Chris Licht said in that incredible profile Tim Alberta did of him last week.
Crazy.
Was that it's very easy to know how to cover Donald Trump. And you just treat him like any other candidate. Now, if you think about those claims, it's kind of fantastic. I mean, what world is he living in where you can treat Donald Trump like any other candidate? I mean, that might have been in 2015. That might be something that somebody in political journalism would say. Now, I don't think there's anybody in the craft who would say that. And so what is he trying to do by minimizing the difficulties in covering a character like Trump and a movement like MAGA? It just shows you just how bizarre this whole episode has been with CNN.
Jay, I feel like taking that example of how to cover Trump and specifically thinking about that train wreck of a town hall that they hosted, the issue, I don't think it's simple, but the way to cover Donald Trump is on tape.
Yeah.
Never live. Not with the White House briefings that he held when he told people to shoot, hydroclock, whatever it was, into their veins, ultraviolet, whatever. Don't cover his press conference live because he's telling people misinformation. Don't cover his town hall live. Tape it and then cut in with fact checks. Is that fair?
It's not only fair, I think it's a consensus position now in journalism. And it's also the tack that other networks are taking after CNN's debacle with Trump. And it's a very common sense kind of thing. I mean, if at any moment he might start misinforming your audience in a dead serious way about things that are factual, then it makes sense to interview him on tape and present the essence of that interview without a lot of the lying. And it's only Chris Licht and his boss Zaslav is confused about this. I mean, it's a pretty simple thing that I think almost any intelligent user of the news system can understand.
I think there's been a lot of focus on Chris Licht for obvious reasons. It's great clickbait. He's a personality. He's had a history. And there's been focus on Zaslav. There's not as much focus on, I think, the major stakeholder and the parent company, John Malone. But it seems like to me the problem isn't solved by getting rid of Licht, as long as you still have a giant conglomerate and these people in charge. They're just going to put another stooge in to try to carry out the same kind of political journalism, this, as you're describing it, as you've always talked about it, both sides, this quote objective, as long as we're pissing everybody off, we're doing the right thing, all that bullshit.
Right. The day after the Chris Licht's firing, this is where we are, is they're looking for a new leader. Okay. But Zaslav hasn't made any shift in direction that he's told anybody about. He still believes in something that he calls the middle, or people around him call the middle. He still believes that the problem when the zone is flooded with shit is that CNN journalists jumped on the field and became advocates. As far as we know, that's still his analysis. Right. So in a sense, nothing has changed. It's just the same scene minus Chris Licht. And many of the serious journalists at CNN find it very insulting to be told that they took sides and became advocates. And that was why CNN developed a problem in the Trump years. Now, I think there are excesses in Trump coverage that could be trimmed. It's not like everything CNN did during the Trump years was that great. They actually went through a huge evolution, which Zaslav never talks about. But they began as a very friendly host of Trump. Everybody remembers that, where they just couldn't get enough of his rallies, for example. That's something that Jeff Zucker later said was a mistake, and he kind of apologized for it. And they did take a turn away from that. And so it's not even, accurate to the history to say that they put on a jersey and became part of the Trump team. It's more like they tried to counter what Trump was doing with a show of their own. And there's a lot of traps and trap doors, I would say, in trying to cover Trump. And one of them is that when you get enraged at him and accuse him of lying in a sort of prosecutorial way, that can benefit him in a lot of different ways.
Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah. And it benefits him with his core supporter. Yeah, he loves it. And so that's what I mean by it's a hard problem to know what to do. And I'm not minimizing how difficult that is, but David Zaslav is minimizing it.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I first saw that occur, I just stopped working at CNN. I worked there for about a year and a half, but I had a good relationship with John King. And I always thought he was so painfully objective and, took it all so seriously. Anyway, he was moderating a debate, and it was before Trump was really on the scene, and Newt Gingrich was on the stage, and Newt Gingrich attacked John King, Mr. Objective, for just the question. And I thought, boom, that's how it's done. That will crush that in terms of getting him attention and getting him support from the people he wants support from, Newt Gingrich, the right. So Trump did that every day. I mean, when April Ryan came in, on like day one, he attacked her. He attacked everybody, and it worked for him. It worked for him on the debate stage, right?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the less known puzzles about that event, the town hall, is that at the same time that CNN was trying to make CNN very welcome again for Donald Trump, and Chris Licht was saying, hey, have fun out there before the event started. At this very moment, in fact, Trump still has a lawsuit for hundreds of millions of dollars against CNN that is pending, right? I mean, it's kind of funny when you think about it, right? Like we should give, airtime to this guy who's suing us. It's just sort of like, it's just symbolic of how absurd that situation was.
What's the lawsuit for? He didn't?
Who knows? I mean, Trump's always got lawsuits.
He's suing everybody.
So it's some sort of fake, defamation of some kind, but it's going nowhere like almost all of his.
He's not paying lawyers to sue everybody. Okay, Jay, the other, I could talk with you about CNN and cable news specifically for hours, but let's leave poor CNN alone. I mean,
Okay.
one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you today is because I've been finding myself, I do this daily, covering the Republican race for the nomination a little bit. Like each day this week and last week, new people have announced.
Yeah, a lot of candidates now.
It's so exciting. I'm really excited Chris Christie's in the game. But you have been talking about horse race coverage and criticizing it forever. America is the only country who does these campaigns for president, much less senator and others, for 2-3 years sometimes. It's huge money makers. It's really fascinating. I myself, I'm conflicted over it. I mention that someone's in, I might play a clip and make fun of them. And then I try to move on and not like talk about what lane they're in and analyze it too much because I don't want to be part of that problem. What do you think about how much we've learned since you started criticizing horse race politics? Political coverage?
Everyone by now knows what the criticism is of horse race journalism, including the people who still continue to practice it. But I think the reason that it remains the default setting for election coverage, which it is that who's going to win, which is the core question in horse race journalism, and how are they proposing to win, and what is their plan to win, and what is their strategy, and what do the polls say about the chances of them winning, right? All of that can be seen as non-ideological political journalism that is up to date and of the moment. And because the question, who's going to win, is not fundamentally an ideological question, right? So the more time you spend on it, the more free of ideology you feel, because it's kind of an empirical question. Yeah. Now, we could just say, you know what? Let's let the voters decide. And we wouldn't need 2 years of horse race politics to do that. But fundamentally, I think that the strength of that model is that it can be done in what appears to be a non-ideological way. It's also a model that's reusable.
Yeah.
Every election, right? You don't have to come up with a new approach for the election. You just do what you've always done, right? It's sort of like the Christmas tree decorations. You get them out in late November or early December. You put them on the tree. They work like they always have. Then you put them in box, and next year they're ready to use again, right? That's what horse race coverage is like. So you don't have to endure any expense in learning or in dollars to come up with a new model for each election. That's another thing that's an advantage. It has a constituency. I mean, who's going to win is kind of an exciting question in some ways. It is a way to follow the campaign, and there is some interest in that among the audience. So you can say it makes the campaign easier to participate in. And these are thin notions, but they are enough to keep it as the default model.
The default model. By the way, thank you to a Jewish man for making a Christian holiday example for that.
I've never set up a Christmas tree. I've never had a Christmas tree, but I know what happens because I'm clued into the Christian world.
You have heard about the secrets.
Yeah.
We've tried to keep them from you. Well, I've always thought, and I think that you have been talking about this for a long time, that the coverage should be more about what the candidates' policies are and who they would help and who they would hurt. I've always been wanting to talk more about policy and talking to policy experts than talking about politics and the horse race stuff.
Well, that's not exactly where I am in my own views. That's usually how it's presented, as either horse race or policy.
Okay.
And I have a slightly different view from that, which is I think the first thing that journalists covering an election need to do is find out what the voters think, not about which candidate they favor, but what they want the campaign to be about. So I have pressed for a long time, for what's called a citizens agenda model of campaign coverage. And a citizen's agenda model, you start not with the race, not with the candidates, and not with the likelihood of anyone winning. Instead, you start with the people you are trying to inform. If you work at the Dallas Morning News, that means the people in the Dallas-Fort Worth area who listen to you and read you, right? You start with the people you are trying to inform in your election coverage, and you ask them a simple question. What do you want the candidates to be talking about as they compete for votes? What do you want the candidates to be talking about as they compete for votes? Now, if you can imagine asking that question again and again, not to 10 or 15 people, not to 100 people, but to thousands of people, then there are going to begin to emerge some patterns in their answers. And those patterns are really important because those are the priorities the voters have about what they want this campaign to be about. And when you feel like you've heard people well enough, you can fashion what they have told you into a kind of agenda,
right?
Which is nothing more than a priority list of what we want to see the candidates talk about, right? And that agenda can then begin to guide your coverage so that the horse race is not the default model. And it provides, of course, clues on what to ask the candidates when you have the opportunity to do that. And if during the campaign, what people want the candidates to talk about changes, you can change your own agenda as well. And this is not a new idea. It's not super complicated. It's been in place or in existence since the 1990s. It's a known alternative to the horse race. And if our national media wanted to evolve away from horse race journalism, it would have discovered this other approach waiting for it if it wanted to. I don't think they want to. Anyway, so that's a little bit different than policy.
Right. No, I hear you. Do you think that journalists should mostly focus on, those that don't get their voice out there, white rural people in diners?
Well, the whole diner coverage, I was actually having an interesting discussion with Benji Sarlin of formerly of NBC and now
he's good. I like Benji.
Semaphore about this, and he made a really interesting point, which is the diner convention began, or the model is useful to journalists because if you have your own people, your own columnists, your own contributors who are putting out MAGA ideas and claims, right? You begin to get into this legal problem where they have to start saying stuff that's totally bonkers. And we saw from Fox News how dangerous that can be to the news company. If you have in your employ a MAGA person, you are actually risking your own company, right? So that's problematic because you can't have a contributor who's doing that, even though other networks have sort of risked it. It's not a good idea. And so if you want to understand these voters, you can't have a MAGA person really on your staff because they're going to do things that are like really risky for your reputation, right? Yeah. And so that's how you wind up with interviews with voters in diners, because you're not really at risk if a voter says this and you put it on air, it has some sort of news value. And I thought it was a really interesting way to look at it. But over time, of course, this became a kind of a joke with the audience and with critics and even with journalists themselves, the idea of the diner conversation with Trump voters to see if they're still Trump voters. In fact, it became so embarrassing that in Meet the Press once, when the editor of the New York Times was on the program, he actually said, "No more diners. We understand that we've kind of like overdone that."
Wow. I never heard of that. I got to find it. My final question to you is just, what do you think? What do you make of the rise of independent journalism? I don't even know. I'd like to just know what language you use around the Substackers, the Patreons, people like me, specifically. Like my path was corporate media for years. I worked at CNN, SiriusXM, MSNBC, MSN, the Comedy Central, and now I work out of a shed. And I've never felt like I'm doing better work. I don't take ads. I mean, it's all subscription. At least it has been. I've been able to survive on that. But, you know, my credibility then rises when I answer to the subscriber. But listen, I could be a horrible fascist and be making a lot more money. So there's a lot of concern that I have around this model. And I think that people that are doing bad things are making a lot more money than me. As a result of this. So I kind of see it both ways. I feel like I'm doing pretty good work. I'm real proud of it. I follow the lead of people like you and Jarvis and others, and I listen and I try to be as good as I can be. But, you know, I'm a better person than those people, Jay, and I still have my flaws and faults. But I answer to my audience every Thursday night, as a matter of fact, in person for 3 years. How are we doing out here in the wild without editors, without guardrails?
I've been wrestling with this question for a very long time. In 2006, I wrote a post. It's probably my most well-known thing called "The People Formerly Known as the Audience." The people formerly known as the audience, which is kind of what you're talking about here. And it was saying, look, the tools of media production have been taken out of the exclusive hands of the media and given to the people formerly known as the audience.
Yeah.
Right. And I wasn't so much celebrating or critiquing this as just making note of it. This is different.
Great.
As a pattern than what we've had. Right. Because when people can have a blog, it's like their own newspaper. When people can have a podcast, it's like the radio. Right. When people have YouTube, it's very much like TV.
Yep. And anybody can have it now because
anybody can have it.
Camera,
right? Not only that, but as we've seen, the First Amendment protects their right to have that. It's central to what the First Amendment is about. Right? Protecting an elite of professional journalists is not the core of the First Amendment.
Right.
They are part of it for sure, like anyone else. But that's the point. It's there for everyone, right? Not just the media. Now, for a while, I was like, wow, this is really cool. This is interesting. I had my own blog starting in 2004. I was participating in this quote unquote revolution. And it is a revolution because if you know your Karl Marx, he defined a revolution as when the means of production change hands. That's a revolution in the way Marx thinks, right? Well, that's exactly what happened with different forms of media, right? The means of production changed hands. So the next time I wrote about this was like 2009 in a post called Audience Atomization Overcome, where I made a further observation, which is one of the most potent things about the internet is that it allows people of like mind to find each other.
Yeah.
And realize how many of them there are, right? You deal with this all the time, right? And that seemed to me to be a pretty wonderful thing. So if I have a rare but still common enough disease, a medical condition, I don't have to just rely on what my doctor tells me. If I go online, I'll be able to find support groups of people who've been dealing with this medical condition for a long time. And that's amazing, right? Because it costs me nothing. And it's a great thing to add to the authority of the doctor, the knowledge that people have collected themselves. So that's the way I was thinking of this fact that the internet allows people of common mind to locate each other. And what I was not quite seeing was there's a dark side to that, a really dark side.
Yeah, I mean, because I can find there is no white supremacists on my street or in my neighborhood, but I can find them all through my computer. And now I can find a whole bunch of other people whose family members and loved ones were killed by the vaccine too. And I can the hive mind. But the same is true for so many other pervasive and pernicious problems, as well as great examples like the one you met, love and community and actual great journalism and science too.
And there are many consequences of this. One of those is the media system is kind of chaotic now. That's one result. Another result, really important, is that the power and authority of the quote unquote traditional news media is much diminished from where it was pre-internet, right? And I think a lot of times people on the left have a kind of hard time with that. They kind of like the idea of an all-powerful media that kind of dictates to the world what's going to happen. And that's not really true anymore. In fact, conservative media has succeeded in creating an alternative universe so that in a lot of ways, the candidates, for example, don't have to deal with the traditional media at all. Right.
That's such an important point. I've seen it over and over. Most Republicans will not go on with CNN, talk to a New York Times reporter or anyone else because they're going to ask decent, objective, hard questions that they don't want to answer. So they go on with any number of that with way more viewers getting to their voters, their audience on Newsmax or whatever it might be. Podcast, YouTube. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the media world has changed a lot in that sense, and where a shorthand for it would be there are no gatekeepers now, or the gatekeepers don't have the same power that they once did.
Right.
On the positive side, it allows for many more voices to gain audiences, which you're participating in, not just in podcasting, but YouTube especially is super effective for this. But there are other forums as well. And so the media world is just very, very different from when it was at sort of the peak influence of the mass, which is something Jeff Jarvis talks about a lot when he's on shows like yours. And what we haven't figured out yet is in that more chaotic, more democratized, more unpredictable media environment is the idea of an informed public. Is that still practical? Does that actually describe anything? I did my dissertation on the notion of a public as the thing on the receiving end of the press. That's what I did my PhD research on.
Me too.
And I don't know if the public or the informed public is actually a useful thing to think with anymore. I'm not sure, because there are so many different publics for one.
Right, because as long as RFK Jr.'s informing them, maybe it's not great.
Yeah, and there's different worlds of fact, and there's flooding the zone. Yeah. And anyway, these are the kinds of things that I struggle with. Yeah. And I spend most of my day thinking about while I'm, following the news and criticizing.
Well, I'm so glad that you spent some part of your day thinking about them with me. I'm real grateful to see you again, Jay, and have you join me. You're truly an American treasure, and I appreciate and respect. I often think of what you would think of what I'm doing and wanting your approval. So it matters a lot to me that you're still out there doing it, and I appreciate you joining me very much.
Thanks for the invite, Pete.
All right, there he goes, Jay Rosen, pressthink.org, and at JRosen_NYU on Twitter and Facebook, Jay Rosen. So good. I really appreciated that. I hope you learned a lot and took a lot away from that. I guess, like I said, he's one of the most respected journalism professors and press critics out there. So really big deal to get him on the show and let him know that you heard him. That would be a big deal to me. Go on Twitter and just say, loved hearing you on Pete Dominick Show, or whatever else you beautiful people keep saying to guests and about the show on social media. I can't thank you enough for that. That's all I've got for you today. Look for a conversation with Christian and Ophira tomorrow, trying to make that happen. No promises. If not that, maybe something else, maybe Siegel. I'm just going to keep pumping it out. I'm loving it. I'm fired up. And I can't thank you enough for your support. So What I'm going to give you at the end is another quote from the Stoics. We must concern ourselves absolutely with the things that are under our control and entrust the things not in our control to the universe. That is Rufus, Musonius Rufus.
Stand up, you gotta stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. So get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. While you lying awake wondering where the money all went, it'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.